Okay, so we've talked about why spaced repetition is an absolutely amazing thing, and hopefully, or maybe not, you might have seen my YouTube video where I talk about the evidence behind spaced repetition in a lot more detail. Let's now talk about some of the methods for applying spaced repetition to our studying. And my personal favorite way of doing this is by using the retrospective revision timetable. Now, this is a term that I've coined. It's basically a revision timetable, but instead of deciding in advance what topics we're going to do on any given day, we decide on the day based on what topics we've done in the past and how effective our recall of that topic was. Now, I've done an entire YouTube video talking about this with some fancy animations and loads of iPad screen drawings and stuff. So I know this is part of an online class, but I'm just going to include the YouTube video right here because if you haven't seen it, then I think I can't really explain it any better now, and I also can't be bothered to do the iPad animations for absolutely every video here because I've already done them before. So you're now going to see me from the past talking about the retrospective revision timetable, and then at the end of that bit, I'll talk to you about how I do that in Notion these days because I don't use Google Sheets for that anymore. But here is the YouTube video that I did a few months ago talking about the retrospective revision timetable. Prospective means looking forward, and retrospective means looking back. And what most people think of as a revision timetable tends to be prospective, so it tends to look something like this. You've got your dates down one column, and then you've got the topics that you're going to revise each day in your kind of rows. And the idea is when you're making these, you'd predict in advance what kind of topics you want to be doing. But this method has some problems, and I used to use this when I was kind of pre-GCSE, but I recognized quite early on that I was being quite inefficient, and there's four main problems that I used to have with this method. So firstly, this method requires us to, in a way, prophesize, look into the future, and work out kind of 6 weeks in advance what sort of topics we're going to be struggling most with 6 weeks from now. And this for me was always tricky because there were always random days where something would prop up and I'd be going out with some friends or, sitting at home doing a raid on World of Warcraft, and, I just wouldn't follow my study timetable. Or if I did follow it to a T, I'd realize that actually I'm repeating subjects pointlessly, or, more often than not, I just wouldn't end up following it at all. Secondly, I think a problem with this method is that it encourages us implicitly to think of revision as something that is a function of time rather than a function of topics. So we've got the time axis down our kind of main axis, and therefore every day we think, okay, it's the 7th of April, I'm going to consult my revision timetable and I'm going to therefore revise these 3 topics. And that's not really how studying should be done. And I realized this later, that I think it's better to think of it in terms of topics rather than in terms of time. So instead of thinking that each day I need to get 3 topics done, instead I'll be thinking in terms of subjects and in terms of topics, and thinking that by the end of the exam period, I want to know everything about every topic. Therefore, what do I need to do for that to take place? And this is going to sound a bit abstract, but I'll explain it in more detail when we explain the retrospective timetable, and you'll hopefully see that that method solves this particular problem. Thirdly, with this standard prospective revision timetable, there's no real way of seeing how much of each subject you know. Apart from doing past papers and apart from having your own separate record, like if I were to glance down this list and it's, let's say, the 10th of April, I can see that, okay, well, I studied physics, electricity on the 4th, but I mean, do I know the topic? Are there any other topics in physics? There's no easy way of me seeing an overview of the subject and therefore working out exactly what I need to learn. And finally, there's the whole thing of actually creating one of these timetables in the first place. I always used to view this as an activity in procrastination. I'd be like, okay, I need to get some work done. You know what? I've not made my revision timetable for the year yet. I'm going to sit down and get all my pretty colors out back in the day before the iPad Pro existed and the Apple Pencil wasn't a thing. Get my pretty colored highlighters out and my felt tip pens and make this fancy big ass revision timetable, and I would never follow it. Equally, I had some friends who would regard the revision timetable as such an insurmountable thing that they had to do before they started studying that it put them off studying for like, a period of weeks to months because they had to sit down and make this timetable and they just couldn't get around to, overcoming the activation energy required to make one of these. So those are just some problems with the prospective revision timetable. These are all just my thoughts. Maybe it works for you, but I'll explain what the retrospective revision timetable looks like now, and hopefully you might be able to take something away from that to make your own studying a little bit more efficient. Okay, so a retrospective revision timetable looks something like this. So as you can see, we've got the topics within physiology, these 6 different topics. We've got those down the main axis of our spreadsheet, and this is the exact opposite to how it is with the prospective revision timetable where we had the dates down the front. So let's say it's the 4th of April and I've arbitrarily studied the heart and the kidneys. Using my retrospective revision timetable, I'm going to note the fact that I studied the heart and the kidneys on the 4th of April. Then let's say it's the 5th of April. I look at my retrospective sheet and I see, oh, I haven't revised the lungs yet. Why don't I do that? So I do that. And then on the 6th and the 7th, I do the rest of the topics because I see that they're blank and I haven't done them yet. So now let's say it's the 8th of April and I know that I need to revise physiology. I look down my list and think, So it's been about 4 days since I've done the heart and the kidneys, and I vaguely reckon that the kidneys are a little bit harder, so I'm gonna go for the kidneys, and then I revise the kidneys on the 8th of April. But because I'm a good student and I'm using effective study techniques, I'm not just going to read my notes on the kidneys because that would be a complete waste of time. Instead, I'm going to be using active recall. And hopefully when I studied the kidneys on the 4th of April, I wrote down a long list of questions for myself that I could answer, or I got some past papers from somewhere, or I found an essay plan with essay questions, this sort of stuff. Either way, I'm using active recall. I've got the book closed and I'm trying to answer all the questions that I previously wrote for myself about the kidneys. And then, I get some stuff wrong, so I look it up. And I'd say overall, I judge that I'm reasonably okay at the kidneys, but not perfect. So I'm gonna highlight that in yellow. This is the classic traffic light method of, color coding. Now let's say it's the 9th of April and I think, you know what, why don't I do the heart? Because it's been a while since I've done that. So do the heart on the 9th of April. And then having answered the active recall questions that I set for myself on the previous time I studied it on the 4th, I think, you know what, I'm actually pretty good at the heart. So I'm gonna color that in green. Fantastic. And I'm just going to fill in some random dates. So hopefully you can see how I've done that here. Now let's say it's the 13th of April and I'm thinking, you know what, I should revise some physiology. I look down this list and I see that, okay, well, it's been a while since I studied the kidneys, but the kidneys are yellow. And actually, even though I studied the lungs on the 10th of April, they were red at the time. So you know what, I'm going to prioritize the lungs, because the question I'm going to be asking myself each day is, if the exam were tomorrow, which topic would I be least happy about? And currently I'm least happy about the lungs, which is why I'm going to revise them on the April the 13th. And I'm going to color code those in yellow afterwards because I think, okay, I'm now at a yellow level when it comes to the lungs. So now let's say it's April the 14th and I'm thinking, great, I don't have any reds left on this list. So why don't I revise the kidneys, because it's been the longest time since I've done that. This is spaced repetition in action. And, I revise the kidneys and I'm pretty good at the kidneys, so then that becomes green. And as you can see, over time, we develop this understanding of every single topic within our subject, because each day we are tackling the thing that we find most difficult. We're not doing that thing with the prospective revision timetable where we're studying a topic because we told ourselves we'd study that topic 6 weeks ago. We're studying the topic that we have decided we are weakest on. And therefore, every time we have a study session, we are working on our weakest point and therefore getting the most bang for our buck in terms of revising efficiently and trying to maximize our marks in the exam and our knowledge for day-to-day life. And the idea is that hopefully by the end of it, as the exam approaches, you look at physiology and you think, you know what, everything is a green on this. I know physiology. You look at anatomy and think, oh, I've still got a few areas of yellow. So I'm going to screw physiology for today. I don't care about it. I'm going to focus on anatomy because those are my weak areas. This gives you a very easy way of seeing the whole overview of your subject without having to predict anything in advance, because we are terribly bad at predicting the future. And finally, one great thing about this is that it doesn't really take any effort to get started beyond initially scoping the subject and just writing down the list of every single topic in your spreadsheet. And I think that in itself is an incredibly valuable exercise, because a subject can often seem very daunting until you write down all the topics that are in it. And then you think, oh wow, physiology seems complicated, but actually there's only really 6 topics. So great, I can do 6 topics. That's like 1 topic a day. I've got 8 weeks until my exams. I can repeat every single topic 8 times. That's pretty incredible. I can learn all of human physiology. And that's a nice attitude to have, rather than kind of being in the dark and being like, oh, I need to revise some chemistry, but I'm not really sure what to revise because I don't really know what's in it. And the specification has 85 different points of it and yeah, whatever. So this is the retrospective revision timetable. Now let's jump into Google Sheets and I will show you how that works in real life by using an example from my 3rd year of university. All right, so this here is the retrospective revision timetable that I used in my 3rd year of university. That was the year that I did by far the best in. I won the prize for the best exam performance that year when I was studying psychology, which was pretty awesome. And I think the reason that that happened was because I very aggressively used all of the most efficient study techniques: active recall, spaced repetition, spider diagrams, flashcards. And I'll be making a video at a later date about exactly how I memorized 50 different essays to absolutely smash those exams, if I can say so myself. Anyway, this is the Google Sheet. And as you can see, I've got it split up into section A, section B, section C, which corresponds to our 3 papers within psychology. And as you can see, I've got a list of all the topics down one end and the dates in the other one. So taking a look at this, we can see that on the 20th of April, I did these 4 topics. I did implicit versus explicit memory, recollection versus familiarity, semantic versus episodic memory, and short-term memory versus long-term memory. And these are kind of essay-based things, but I'll talk more about exactly how I studied these particular topics in that video that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Anyway, the point is I've done all these on the 20th of April, and then I repeated the top one, implicit versus explicit, on the 22nd, and then I had a bit of a gap. And then on the 12th of May, I repeated it again, and then I started color coding it because I was like, right, I'm getting close to the exam now. I should start color coding my stuff. And you can see that over time, everything has become green. And Saturday was like the Saturday before the exam. Tuesday was the Tuesday before. I think the exam was on a Wednesday or a Thursday, something like that. And yeah, over time, I've repeated this topic. So like the top essay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I repeated it 7 times. This was all active recall based repetition. It was me drawing out my spider diagram over and over again until I could do it from memory, until I could basically write out any essay you gave me on implicit versus explicit memory, could cite 10 papers in that essay. And all because I used active recall and spaced repetition to repeat it 7 times until the point where it was green before the exam. And we can see I've done the same thing for section B. This was all about animal cognition, comparative cognition, how the thinking of animals differs to the thinking of humans. So theory of mind, future planning, metacognition. Do animals navigate using cognitive maps? Do animals understand causality? What's the difference between human and animal language? And finally, section C, which was my personal favorite, was all the various things about intelligence and IQ, and for example, sex differences in IQ, very controversial. Sometimes even race differences in IQ, even more controversial, very exciting topic. And then a little bit of stuff about personality, whether there are any genes that influence personality, but who cares? That's all psychology. The point is, 21st of April, 2nd of May, 12th of May, 13th of May, the Saturday before, the Friday before, that sort of stuff. And over time, the stuff has become green because it means I know all of it. So this is the retrospective revision timetable created in Google Sheets. It's very straightforward. List of topics down the A column and then the date that you revised the topic, ideally color-coded based on how well you knew it before you looked at your book along the rows. And that's really all there is to it. So hopefully this video has explained why I think that the retrospective revision timetable is a better, in my opinion, more effective, more efficient way of studying than the prospective revision timetable, the bog standard revision timetable that we all implicitly get taught from a young age. Just to summarize, the main reasons why I think it's good are, firstly, it means you don't have to prophesize into the future because that is impossible. Secondly, it means that you see an overview of all your topics. Thirdly, it encourages you to think of your studying in terms of topics rather than in terms of time, because it doesn't really matter how long something takes. All that matters is that by the end you know everything, rather than, I'm going to do my 3 topics a day for 20 days, and it doesn't matter what happens by the end of it. Focusing on it in terms of topics helps understand stuff. And fourthly, it's so easy to make one of these spreadsheets. You don't have to spend the cognitive effort of thinking 6 weeks into the future and trying to imagine yourself at that point and how many subjects you need to do. Instead, all you have to do is just write down the topics and you can just get cracking with your revision. So thank you very much for watching. Okay, so that was my video from a few months ago about the retrospective revision timetable, and this is what I still use to this day when I need to study for exams. So I've got my postgraduate medical exams coming up and I'm extensively using the retrospective revision timetable. But I will just show you how I actually use that in Notion these days. And in Notion, it's just basically the same thing. I just don't like Google Sheets anymore because I've started using Notion for everything. So here we go. This is HOM. HOM stands for homeostasis, which is human physiology in the Cambridge course. And this is what I've done retrospective revision timetable wise. So you can see we've got the topic of nerves. And then on the 1st of January, I did that for the first time. And then on the 7th of January, and then on the 20th of Feb. And there's different ways that we can rate our understanding of it. So when I was using Google Sheets, I would just color in the cell using, I don't know, the coloring feature. Unfortunately on Notion, you can't color in the cells of a table. So instead, usually, if I'm not feeling fancy, I just rate it out of 5. So this one was a 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, and 5 out of 5. But sometimes if I'm feeling fancy, I'll traffic light it with emojis. So you can use red, yellow, green, whatever. Or you can use stars like 2-star, 4-star, 5-star. But essentially it's exactly the same thing. It just lets me see on a given day what topic I want to study. So for example, today is the 28th of February, I think, 27th of February. And so I've done renal and respiratory recently. I did nerves last on the 20th of Feb. And so I'll probably do that one again. Actually, no, I'll probably do renal again. So then that takes it up to 3 repetitions of renal. So we'll do 27th Feb there. And hopefully then that might be like a 3 out of 5. Or actually, I've done it 3 times recently. Hopefully a 4 out of 5. And then next time I come around to studying physiology, I can decide based on the retrospective revision timetable exactly what I want to be doing. So that's one way of going about how to incorporate spaced repetition. In the next video, we'll talk about my friend Simon Clark's alternative method called the spaced repetition diary, which is an alternative method to this method. I still prefer mine, but other people might prefer his. So we've included that as well. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.